Okay, I think we're good. Hey, nice to meet you. Thanks for taking a minute out.
Yeah, same here. How are you?
I'm excellent. Where are you coming out of?
I am in New Jersey.
Ah, New Jersey. Very nice. I have some relatives up in Long Island, and
Okay.
yeah, so my dad was born in Brooklyn and raised in Long Island, and yeah, so I have some kind of a lineage there. So, but it's great to
Whereabouts on
meet
the
you.
island? Well, same here. Whereabouts on the island? I have my husband works out there, so we only get together on the weekends.
It's Massapequa.
Oh, sure. Okay. Right in his work zone there.
Yeah, my aunt and uncle had a pastry shop called Savaroli, and yeah, it was quite a thing. And my dad, always growing up, when he went out there a few times, he'd always get a big box to bring back, and he would just go crazy and eat the whole damn box before he got on the airplane. And he'd have agita and all this other stuff,
Oh no.
and he knew what he was doing, but he just couldn't
Yeah.
help himself
Couldn't
because
help himself.
because when you come from Missouri, come from Kansas City, you don't get pastry like that unless
Yeah.
you go up east or somewhere that's native. So anyway, it's always a good memory. But
I love it. I
but
love it.
anyway, thank you for taking a minute out today. And I want to begin everything before we get into who you are and what's made you who you are. How did you survive COVID? That time period did its thing on all of us in its own way. How did you get through it? And how has it changed the way that you do things now?
Um, so it definitely shifted everything in my business. What's interesting is the January leading up to the lockdown, there's this thing, it's going to be a 2 week disruption of business. Remember when it was going to be a 2 week
Uh-huh.
thing? We were all going to just have to deal with it.
Of course.
So going into that year, my client work really had been about strategic plans, and everyone was building out strategic plans with a 10-year and some of them a 20-year horizon. Um, and so my January was jam-packed with facilitating those sorts of planning sessions. And in February, of course, was okay, now we've built them. How do we communicate them out? How do we build buy-in? And then March happened. And by mid-March, of course, everything shut down and it ridiculously shrank the lens through which all of my clients were looking, from 10-year, 20-year to how do we just keep the lights on? How do we keep people safe? How do we keep the work running? How do we do that in the most efficient way, albeit remote? And so, I am a person who feeds off of the energy of other people in the room. Even though I consider myself an introvert, the work that I do, I just find most effective when I'm in the same physical room with other people. And so obviously I had to pivot just like everybody else did. I had to figure out how to continue to make connections with clients and for clients remotely, right? So there were 2+ years where we weren't traveling, we weren't going on site with clients. They weren't doing a lot of long-term thinking or planning or executing, because everyone needed to get their arms around what is this thing that we're living through and alongside of. So it definitely had an impact. It definitely, I'm an eternal optimist. So I always looked for what is the opportunity to come out of this. And I don't mean from a revenue perspective, but what is the opportunity for me to learn more, in the midst of sort of restrictions and all of that, and also serve my clients in ways that, where it can help alleviate the pain that they were feeling the most.
So let's get into exactly what you do. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to hypothetically put you in front of a bunch of third graders. Okay. Career day. All right.
Got it.
One of them
Love it.
looks up at you and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
So I work with adults who want to help their companies do better, behave better so they don't get yelled at, do things as a team so they get to win more games, and do things in ways where they get to have fun with what they're doing. Because, when you have to do something just because mom or dad asks you to do it, it's not very fun. But when you do it because you're part of a team and you're part of a bigger goal, it's really fun to learn something new and to do things that you enjoy doing that you're good at. So I help companies, I help grownups do that in ways that are fun and in ways that help them win more games more of the time.
So, how did this journey begin for you? Go back to where you were born and raised, and kind of how the seeds of you being an entrepreneur and being a business leader, how did all that happen? How did it become who you are today?
So do I go out of my voice of thinking of you as a third grader?
No, we stay in grade
Do we
school
have
the
to do
rest
the
of the.
entire interview like I'm talking to a third grader? Because that's really cool. Um, yeah, so I was I consider myself a corporate survivor. I spent the first couple of decades of my career in corporate America. After, by the way, swearing I was never going to work in big corporate. But lo and behold, that's where the opportunities were, and I would never trade the years that I spent in corporate because they were a great training ground. They were a great learning ground. You learn a lot of structure and rigor and best practices when you work in corporate. You also get to work around and for and with leaders that you admire and ones that you would never want to emulate. So it's a nice sort of proving ground and training ground. I was an English major coming out of college, and so I started out in more communications roles. So I was doing everything from editing and writing, got into marketing and a little bit of business development, but really more in support of companies trying to grow. And then I kind of got into human resources through the side door. I was working in customer relations at the time and was doing a lot of training for that team and that organization. And our head of human resources called me and said, you know, our head of training and development just quit. Would you be interested in that role? And I am the daughter of a school teacher and a small business owner. So more of the entrepreneurial kind of flair is definitely in my blood, but so is teaching. And so I kind of moved into HR, and that role morphed into all things talent development. So everything from recruiting and staffing and onboarding to succession planning, talent reviews, executive coaching, leadership development, career development. And I was hooked. The last year that I was in corporate, I was moved into a more of an executive HR position where I was vice president of HR for the largest division of a utility company. And it was great because it really stretched me and I got the opportunity to lead a tremendously talented team. But it also reinforced for me that the soup to nuts HR versus focusing in on enabling and accelerating talent was really not where my heart was. And so coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, in 2011, as I was, getting my arms around this huge role, I was diagnosed with cancer. And so I had to go from traveling 3 weeks out of every four and moving 150 miles an hour to complete stillness, complete silence, take a month off of work to have surgery and deal with all of that. And it was in that silence where I literally didn't check email for the first 3 weeks, which I hadn't not checked email and I couldn't even tell you. And in that silence, I finally could not outrun that voice in my head that had been trying to ask me for so long, are you doing what you're passionate about? And I had to admit that the answer was no. Loved the company, loved the people, loved my team, but what I was doing did not feel fulfilling. And I think too often we sort of get swept into the busyness and swept into the pace and use that as an excuse not to question ourselves. Are we on the right path? And so I got better. I'm cancer free today. I got back to work after recuperating and kind of negotiated my release, right? So I gave notice, but I had been with the company for close to 15 years. So, it took me a couple of months because I really didn't have a plan. I just knew that the path that I was on toward, the executive chair was really not what was revving my engine. And so that's what propelled me onto this entrepreneurial journey. And that was in 2011. And it took me about 2 years to really um, narrow in on, of all the things I could do and all the things I like to do, what did I want to specialize in? What did I want to focus on? And so I formed my company, Talent Boost, in 2013. So in September, it'll be 10 years. And I specialize in helping executive leaders in large US organizations primarily, and specifically HR executives, although I don't exclusively work with HR, but really on helping them align their teams, align their leadership, align their culture, and align their strategy so that they can accelerate their own growth journey.
So I got a corporate question. I know I was in corporate America and that was the best day in the world when I got out. And I personally can't watch The Office. I just can't get into that
You know,
whole,
I never got into that show either. I mean, all the characters I've seen in other things and I love them. I
yeah,
just, I'm not a, I don't watch it either.
I can't do it. It's just like I lived it, I'm out. I'm good. So let me ask you this. Who's been kind of a hero for you in your life?
You know, there are so many, but I literally have to say, and I know this is going to be hokey. It's my mom and dad.
Yeah.
You know, my mom for instilling in me more of um a personal discipline and a commitment to whatever you do, do it well. And my dad, because he's the only person I know who, when he was still working, they're both retired, would whistle on his way to work. He tried working for a big firm; it just didn't suit him. And so when he went out and hung his own shingle, and was a small business owner, you know, you live or die by the work that you do, by the business you bring in and how you execute on that business. And he wouldn't have had it any other way. So, you know, he sort of, while mom kind of instilled in me the self-discipline and the commitment, he instilled in me that you have to enjoy what you do. And if you are not laughing or giggling or finding a reason to smile and whistle through what you do professionally, you're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. Who would you like to meet? Anybody that's alive on the planet right now, who would you love to meet and spend some time with?
So I used to answer that question as Elon Musk, but he's kind of gone off the rails a little bit. So I'm going to pivot to, you know, I would love to spend some time with Brene Brown.
Yeah. 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 I'm Elon Musk is always high up there on the list. And quite frankly, I don't know. I've heard his interviews and I click it off. It's like he's
Yeah.
just, I know has genius DNA in him, and I know that he's mired in thought, but it's like I think even now, especially with what we're seeing with Twitter, I think he's trying as much as he's saying he's being transparent. I think he's trying to kind of be as safe as he can. Because I don't
Mm.
know that he's that concerned about shareholders, but I think he's just getting in a lot of trouble when he talks.
Yeah, I mean, prior to that latest pivot, I always answered um, that I'd want to spend some time with him because he is the genius in the room.
Yeah.
He has innovated so many different things when you look at his whole trajectory. You know, up to and including before Twitter, up to and including saying we can't wait for NASA to get over its bureaucracy to colonize Mars. So I'm going to go out and start SpaceX and I'm going to figure out how we're going to colonize Mars because we need a contingency plan for Earth.
Yeah.
It's that kind of big thinking where he doesn't just philosophize about it. He goes out and builds a company
Yeah.
around the execution that is hugely admirable and makes you feel smarter when you spend time with him, right up until his his latest pivot. So we'll see. I mean, I
Yeah.
think he'll figure out how to swing the pendulum back to, you know, to his core, I hope.
He did say in 2018 in an interview that I just saw recently that he was like, I've warned everybody about AI.
Mm,
I don't know what that means, but he's been kind of like, because he's, on the forefront. Obviously, Tesla's and a lot of things that he does is driven by AI. But he
yep.
has said that there's been some level of consortium of people that have been told we better watch it. We don't want to let this little gremlin eat after midnight, and we'll see what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it'll be crazy. So what is it? Is somebody that's highly driven, you've been on a mortality door with cancer. What is it about you that motivates you every day that drives you to do what you do and be who you are?
You know, I just recently had this insight. Um, that kind of reminded me, this is exactly why I am right where I am meant to be. And I get to do the work I love with people I truly care about in the ways that I want to. My parents, as I said, are my heroes. They are retired. They are getting older. And the longer you have your parents, the more it is a blessing. And I realize that. But the more things start to break down, right? And so whether it's they have a health issue, or my dad who still golfs at 80 years old 2 or 3 times a week, the ability for me to move things around and adjust the work that I do, where I do it, and how I do it, so that I can spend time with my family. Yes, my husband, yes, my beautiful nephews, but most especially my parents, because I am keenly aware that probably the bulk of their years are behind them. And so if I were still in corporate, let alone in the executive wing, I wouldn't have the flexibility, the freedom, or have given myself the permission to be where my family needs me when they need me.
Yeah.
So that's what
So
drives me.
yeah, absolutely. So at this point in business, especially, what are you the proudest of that you've done?
I've been doing a lot of leadership retreats lately. I think now that we've emerged out of COVID, or the bulk of it, I should say, and we're back in person, there's this renewed sense of urgency, not to dust off those 10 and 20-year strategic plans, but to reinvent um, what people's mission and what their vision and what their outcomes look like, and be more realistic. I think COVID sort of taught everyone that 10 and 20-year strategic plans were ridiculously unrealistic, because there's just so much that can happen around the corner. And so a lot of my clients will call me and say, um, we're sort of ready to go back to this strategic planning. Will you come in and facilitate a session for us? And my answer is always the same. I'm happy to do that as day two. But for day one, we need to work on the dynamics of your leadership team, because it doesn't matter how aggressive, ambitious, or well thought out your strategic plan might be on day two. If you haven't worked on strengthening the dynamics, the relationship, the authenticity with which your leadership team works, you're not going to execute your strategic plan. And so I had the occasion to facilitate one of these. This was actually a 2-day retreat. The first day was around team dynamics. The second day was around strategic planning. Back in the fall, with a team that was relatively newly formed. Um, some of them had worked together in a different capacity, but this was the first time this combination of executive leaders had ever been on the same team, let alone in the same room. And on day one, they walked in very distrustful of each other. They didn't really know each other. If they spoke to each other at all before we got going, it was very tactical, very business focused, and very short. And so we spent that first day on team dynamics. And we spoke, we kind of worked through my framework of how do we create a space where people can get really deeply self-aware of what drives them and what makes them tick and how they see the world and why that is different from other people. And then, of course, going deeper from that to say, now that you're more aware of what you're bringing into the room, you need to also be not just aware of what other people are doing and seeing and believing, but why it matters that they have a different perspective, right? And sort of helping them to strengthen those bonds in ways where they could be vulnerable and also curious about each other. And so I'm particularly proud of this one session because they walked in the room not trusting each other. And by the time we were done with day one, they were joking with each other. They were laughing with each other. And we went out to dinner that night as a group, and they practically had to kick us out of the restaurant because nobody wanted to leave.
Yeah.
And there was a moment in that session that really lights me up, because it's I always say I'm the least important person in the room. I'm really here as a vehicle to get you to work more effectively together in less time, right? So that you can do the strategic work on day two. And there's this moment that happens, and it happened then, where they got sort of past their own stuff, so to speak. And if you're watching for it and you do it as often as I've done it, you can see it. You can see it happen, and the tide changes. And when I can be part of that and bear witness to that, um, that change, that shift, and ultimately that transformation, that's the other thing that drives me, and that's what makes me so proud to be in a position to do what I do.
So everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you live your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Hmm. That's a really great question. I am at heart a nerd. I am at heart a funny girl. I don't think that's a secret. I think anybody who knows me would say that as well. I am most driven by family, by faith, and by an opportunity to learn something. Um, I am not Elon Musk. I am not somebody who is constantly driving to prove something else to everybody else. Um, I'm really, contentment to me, um, is almost synonymous with fulfillment. And I don't mean that to say like lazy, like I'm going to rest on my laurels, but I truly believe there is a lot of joy in being content with, um, who you put yourself in the room with and what you bring to that in terms of energy and in terms of, your own personality. Um, and so, the more I get to just be who I am, most of my clients, I'm ex-corporate, most of my clients are corporate. And one of the things that they like about me is that I'm not corporate. I don't talk like somebody from HR. I don't talk like somebody from, the 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 corporate, mahogany row. Not that I sit there and curse like a sailor by any stretch, but I get results because I talk to them in ways that they're not used to talking in a corporate setting, which is more real.
Yep.
And I love doing that. And it's not put on. It's just, if you're going to bring me into the room, you're going to get all of me because I'm
Yeah.
going to leave it all out on the table.
Yeah, that's great. I get it totally. So, Claire, if anyone wants to learn more about you, anything related to your services, hire you, anything at all, where do they go?
Come visit me at clairechandler.net. You can learn more about my work. You can download some free resources, and if you are so inclined, there's a big shiny button on the homepage on, how to apply to work with me.
Excellent. Claire, this has been great. Thank you for opening up. Best of luck with everything.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
See you later.